One moment.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning,
How are you?
everyone.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone.
Glad to be here. I'm so excited to be hosting this event on behalf of Ignite and in collaboration with the amazing Councilwoman Carmelita Gums. She's been a wonderful person to host this event with, and she's brought along two amazing panelists, Kenyette Tisha Barnes and Councilwoman Brittany Claybrooks. And I will be moderating this conversation with the lovely Zion Martin, who serves as the president of the Agnes Scott chapter for Ignite. So I wanted to give it over to Councilwoman Gums to maybe share a few words, if you'd like.
Awesome. Well, I do want to thank you all for joining us on this Saturday morning. And I really appreciate the Ignite Fellows. And I wanted to really take part in a lot of making sure that we know what's going on in politics. And I know some of you have heard me speak to your group before, but I thought it was important not to hear it from me, but hear it from some of my other colleagues to share all of the good, the bad, and the great things around politics and how you can prepare yourself as women to take that run. I know a lot of you are interested in making a political run. And even just if it's in any type of political space, all of the things that you need to consider and how we can operate as fabulous women and still doing our thing in politics. So I brought some of the best and the brightest that will give it to you, the real talk on how to prepare yourself, and hopefully you'll be encouraged. You can use these young ladies as models and mentors to help you. And that is what this is all about, expanding our base of network and influence of women who can cultivate a next generation of political leaders. So I do want to thank my colleagues, Ms. Kenyette Barnes, for joining us, my friend and councilwoman, Ms. Brittany Claybrooks. So I'm excited and I'm looking forward to the communication. I'm looking forward to the questions. I think you have some very insightful leaders on the line that will definitely share all the good, the bad, and the great things in politics. So let's take it away, Lauren. And I'll just look forward to the talk afterwards, because I know you all are going to receive some great gems from these leaders. So I'll just sit back and watch and enjoy.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Councilwoman Gums. I also wanted to plug in, if you're interested in joining our movement of young women, please visit us at ignitenational.org, where you'll be able to take more action there. But I wanted to introduce our speakers, our wonderful speakers. So I'll go ahead and introduce the lovely Kenyette Tisha Barnes, who is an international anti-human trafficking advocate and national co-founder of Mute R. Kelly. Thank you, Kenyette, for being here today with us. I think, oh, you're muted. Okay.
Awesome. All right, thank you for having me. There you go.
And we also have wonderful Councilwoman Brittany Claybrooks, who serves as a councilwoman for the 2nd Ward in East Orange, New Jersey. And she also serves as the economic project manager in Plainfield. Thank you, Councilwoman, for being here.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here. I'm honored, actually. Thank you.
Well, let's have you two. So first, we wanted to get a feel of your story. What called you into the work that you're doing today?
Okay.
Yeah.
Would you like me to start, or would you like a key?
Sure.
Okay.
You're fine. Go ahead.
Thank you. So what's funny is most of what has motivated my career, because prior to being elected, I was just engulfed in government in general, and just direct services through government, is my upbringing. Everything that was my childhood was also funded by the government. I was in foster care. I was adopted. I, went to public schools, When I did go to a private school after having been expelled, I was on a voucher, all the federal programs, all of the healthcare programs, Medicaid, all those things were my childhood. And I was really extremely motivated by the fact that whenever you cross the city line where I was, because I grew up in Michigan, in both Detroit and a city that was predominantly Black just outside of it. And if you cross those city lines into other places, you would completely notice that things were different. And I always questioned that. I always wanted to know why. And so I dedicated my life to trying to figure out why those issues existed. And as I began to move other places, where I went to Florida A&M University and at NYU, and I worked in Florida, and I visited so many different places in Virginia where I lived in the DMV area. And I learned that these same issues were similar to people who looked like me and who lived in environments like mine just across the country. So I chose to dedicate my life to figuring out through urban planning how we can make cities better. Because if you can change where people lived, then you ultimately can change the outcome of their life potentially. So I dedicated my life to that cause. And here I am today, a whole bunch of jobs, a whole bunch of experiences in between as a sitting councilwoman. And I'm really grateful for that, that opportunity, and that my career has, and God has brought me to this space.
Awesome. So mine is probably not as exciting as that, and I'm so honored to be here with Councilman Clay Brooks, because I think part of the legislative places, part of political spaces, they tend to do a really good job at politicking to us and not politicking with us. So when I see a young lady like Councilwoman Claiborne, who has the not so model American story, nor the legacy of politics, and she's just sitting councilwoman, that just makes my heart just sink. So my history. So I think I've been political, my parents would say it, since I was about 5. I remember a story. There was a song called 5 Little Ducks or 12 Little Ducks or something like that. And my brother David, who was a year older than me, had come home. And he was singing the song. He just learned it. And in the middle of the song, I said, well, then Daughter Duck came out to play. And everyone just kind of looked at me like, wait a minute, kid, no, that's not the song. I'm like, well, why isn't it the song? Why is it that all of these ducks are masculine kids out playing, yet there are no daughter ducks? So I think my parents would probably say that was the beginning of my political kind of orientation. But I would say more formally, I attended an out-of-district school. I attended the Cleveland School of the Arts. And while I was a student there, I got involved with student government. I also was an intern at the citywide student government in Cleveland, Ohio, and I worked with Councilwoman Fannie Lewis. If you don't know who Fannie Lewis is, you should probably Google her. She was one of the first Black councilwomen in the city of Cleveland, and she was a single mother. She was on welfare. She had a story that we don't normally see in a sitting politician, and not only was she an amazing advocate, she completely changed the hub area of Cleveland to what it is today. So I would say I worked with Fannie Lewis. I was a staffer with Dennis Kucinich. If any of you know who Dennis Kucinich was, he was a long-term councilman. He was a congressman in Ohio. I did canvassing, answered phones, and I was just always in some way had my nose in politics. I don't even know why. I remember as a young woman, I got a student internship at the Cleveland City Hall for the council. And I remember one day I was literally sitting inside Councilman Lewis's office, just kind of at his desk, rifling through mail, nothing, nefarious. I was just sitting there like, yeah, I belong here. And then fast forward beyond kind of a precocious adolescence to, a young adult, work. I moved to Philadelphia. As a grad student at the university studying public health. And what I found is that, a lot of the problems that were happening around, adverse health outcomes, either maternal health, maternal morbidity and mortality, child morbidity and mortality, HIV, substance use disorders or any of those, had I had a political hand in it. And that was the first time I'd ever learned of sitting judges taking kickbacks for private juvenile detention, and that was in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And so I think at that point, I realized that the decisions were being made at the grassroots level and at the political level. And once you get to the political level, it's a little less nicer than people think it is, you know. And then fast forward, I did some lobbying in Pennsylvania, I did lobbying in Virginia, and now I am a contract lobbyist in Georgia under the Georgia General Assembly and the 5th District of Georgia Congressional District. And so what that means is that as a contract lobbyist, people have a piece of legislation that they want lobbied, or people have an issue that they want to see kind of move in a political way, then, you know, I'm like first line pick, I think. And so I currently now work as a contract lobbyist. I've worked on legislation from getting cameras in special education classrooms to overhauling our human trafficking legislation. So we can talk more about it as we go more into the segment. But as a primer, that's who I am.
Wonderful. Thank you both for sharing. I'm just so excited to hear more about it. I'll pass it over to Zion to shoot you guys the next question.
Yes, thank y'all for sharing. That was super inspiring to hear. And I think going off of that, like as a woman, what challenges do you feel like you faced in your field, and how have you been able to overcome those?
For me, one of the biggest challenges, so I'm going to share a personal one and a professional one. Initially, sometimes, and I spoke to some young women yesterday here in the city of East Orange at the East Orange Campus High School, shout out to them. And we had this very same conversation of what it looks like to be in this field as a woman. And I had the opportunity of sitting on that platform with our state senator, Teresa Ruiz. And interestingly enough, in discussing that, one of the things that I noticed, or one of the things that constantly comes up for me, is facing the challenge of not the inability to do the work, but showing up in the work authentically. Because historically, up until now, we're starting to see more women who come into the space that are genuinely showing up as themselves. You know, we live in a time, particularly women in our generation, like myself. I may be a little bit older than you, Zion and Lauren, but we are coming up at a time where women are challenging what the images of lawmakers look like, and they're challenging how we show up in this space, how we dress, how we look. And even as early as 2009, when I first came into the space, that wasn't always, even then, the case. And so one of the things that I was fearful of is, would I be able to show up authentically in the space and still be able to get the work done? Because as you know, people in our generation, if we don't know who you really are, because of some of the things that Ms. Kenyatta mentioned about, you know, politicking to folks and talking at people rather than talking to them, I was fearful that my life may have to change into that. Because remember, I started working in the space in so many capacities, whether it was working for an elected official and hearing how people are briefed or how we have to be measured. So one of the challenges I faced was wondering whether or not I could bring my entire truth to the table and still be respected and still be honored and still be able to get my message across. Luckily, I was given the opportunity and the platform to do that by people who lead our community. When they invited me in the room, because let's be clear, you don't get here by yourself. When I was invited in the room, I was given permission to show up and be who I was, because who I was in their eyes, and I'm so grateful to them for that, was what our ward needed at the time. So that is where I started to feel like God carved out that space for me at that time. And then the other challenge that I would say is facing the challenge of having a specific agenda, knowing what needs to be done, and then learning the process that it takes. Because it's one thing to work in the business every day. When I was, just in the urban planning business or in the urban planning field for the government, or working on affordable care, enrolling folks in Virginia up and down the state, trying to get Medicaid expansion passed. When I was doing that work for young parents and FMLA, advocating for more liberal laws around that with young invincibles, or even trying to get some juvenile justice reform passed in the state of Florida, where I worked at the juvenile justice department, you get used to it. You get used to having to do the bureaucratic process. But as a legislator, you come in every day like, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. And then you learn that same level of patience and the ability to be measured and say, things are not going to happen overnight. But if every day you get closer to that thing than you were when you started yesterday, then that's all right. And learning to be okay with that in a time where we are fighting hard for change and our generation is not letting up. And so learning to remain the same level of patient that I was when I was working in those other spaces, and channeling that even through the legislative process. So those are just, there are so many of them, but those are the most salient for me that came up.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, I think we can pass it over to, can you hear me?
I can. Thank you. Okay. No, I was like, well, I'm going to wait for the mic to pop on. So I think that was kind of, static for most of us. I think for me politically, I had to deal with the fact that I was most likely flocked with someone's wife or girlfriend as opposed to a legislative strategist. So, walking into a space, kind of showing up, as a woman, as a thin woman, as a woman that kind of people make aspersions about, I had to really work harder, I believe, to kind of put a cloak over my appearance and the way I presented to people, especially male lawmakers. The thing for me that became probably challenging was, when I had to actually meet with a lawmaker as a lobbyist, not as an advocate, as an activist, or a constituent, which are all amazing, advocates in the legislative space, but as a professional, trained, educated lobbyist. It's like my education, I went to Case Western Missouri, I went to honors on Cleveland State, I went to Temple University, George Washington University. I mean, you're not going to dismiss me as something cute. I'm going to teach you who I am. I sit here as a Black American woman with Native American, Black American, and East African heritage, and I am, a scholar of Soviet history. It's like, yes, don't ask, I don't know. But anyway, so you have to kind of walk into spaces sort of with your armor up, because you literally have to disarm some of these guys, because I can't tell you how many times I walk into a male legislator's office, both in Virginia and in Pennsylvania, and I request the door to remain. And it's things like that. And, or, yeah, I like this bill, but let's talk about it over dinner. Well, no, we're not going to talk about it over dinner. Let's talk about it here. You have time, I have time. Let's talk about it here. Or I have a better idea. Why don't I just send you a fact sheet of what the bill needs to do and why you need to support it? And then it's always, oh, I was just saying, no, we're not doing that. Or it's, where are you from? Let's talk more about that. Yeah, I remember when I was in the Navy, I went to Somalia, and oh my God, let's talk about this bill. So I felt like I almost had to enter a space as almost like a warrior. And at some times, in some cases, depending on how disarming I had to be, and in a predominantly masculine space, I was exhausted. I was physically exhausted. And I'm like, why do I keep doing this? Well, I keep doing it because it's necessary. I keep doing it because I understand that in order for us to really have legislation that doesn't speak to us, but speak as part of our input, I have to be at the table. I understand for the 6 or 7 mentees I have this year, and every year I try to open myself up to take new mentees. they need me to be able to be that disarming warrior so that when they walk into the space, they don't have to deal with what I dealt with. What else have I dealt with? I've dealt with racism. I've dealt with sexism. I've dealt with misogynoir from Black male legislators. I've dealt with feminist racism from white female legislators. I've dealt with kind of party racism from people who assume my political party, and I'm a nonpartisan lobbyist. I lobby for Republican lawmakers and Democratic lawmakers. So, I don't like that part of the job. That is a real part of the job. I'm so glad that forums like this exist, because I think a lot of that happens behind the scenes, and then we go into our individual cocoons and kind of process and heal from that so that we can actually continue to do the work. Because if you don't do the work, trust me, they will legislate over your head. And this is what I tell people when we get this question, why don't you just stop? I have people that, why don't you just stop? Why are you? Because if I don't have a seat at the table, if I don't demand my voice is there, if I don't demand that this happens, trust me, for people to not see Black faces, especially Black femme faces inside of legislative bodies, there's a whole lot of legislation legislating to us. Okay? The Welfare Reform Act, all of that stuff was targeting Black women who were low income, working class Black women, and not a Black woman was at the table. So that is the reason why I'm here.
Wow, that was everything. Thank you so much.
Awesome.
I'm just amazed by the work that you both do, but also incredibly inspired by the fact that you guys also mentor other young people and empower them to do similar work, but work that also makes them passionate, work that they're passionate about. And I wanted to speak on the fact that a lot of young people that look like us sometimes experience imposter syndrome because a lot of these spaces are white dominated or white male dominated. So what would you say to those folks? How would you encourage them to show up how they are, and how you guys show up every day in your roles?
Listen, so thank you for this question. I think it's important for us to talk about it. This is a part of the business that I get very passionate about. And the reason why I'm passionate about it is because you and I are coming through at a time that is much more privileged than those that came before us. That does not mean that there's not still a lot of fight ahead of us, but it does show that we are proof of the work that the women put in before we got here. Because the way that I am able to exist today is built on the sacrifices of the women that came before me. And I am extremely fortunate. And you don't really, whenever I'm asked to do these kinds of conversations, it is very hard for me to talk about being in this space without being comfortable in this space and showing up the way I do without talking about the women who were in my corner that helped me get here. Because usually what I found is that there may have been a man that would have extended the invitation to come into the room. But every time I got to a room, I don't care which one it was, there was always a woman there that was showing up in the way that I needed to see her show up, so that when my time came, and at the time I didn't know it was, because being elected it wasn't something that I was looking for at this time in my life. But every single boss that I had, and I know that this is not the case and has not been the case for a lot of women I run into, because, systemically, it just doesn't work that way. But every single boss, every director I had, every, woman that led me along the way was Black and woman. And so when and I can go down a list of, being at the Department of Juvenile Justice. Wanda Finney was the assistant secretary at the time. I directly reported to her, and she was doing all type of reform, and the department was getting all type of recognition for their work in reforming juvenile justice in Florida, of all places. So seeing her and then moving on to DC and having her be so instrumental in having that happen, and then you get on the House floor, not only are you in the room, in the cloakroom, with so many dynamic Black congresswomen, but my direct, again, manager was a Black woman by the name of Latrice. And I could continue to call their names. As I moved on to Young Invincibles, my direct director was Kaisa Denis and Sade Moon Sammy Gray and Christina Rivera, a Hispanic woman, who they were owning their space, and they encouraged me to do the same. Come up to New York, go to NYU, come to East Orange, invited in the room by men. But by the time it was over with, Rashida, who was the founding principal of Dutton Consulting, boss, and moving on to the East Orange Department of Urban Planning, my director was a man, but he was also Black, right? So seeing Black people, particularly majority Black women, the director I work under now in the city of Plainfield, Black woman, one of the strongest, most powerful women in the development space in our area, Valerie Jackson. So understanding how important it is for us who are coming in this space much earlier at the time that we are, knowing that we have other women who are doing it and have been doing it, and who are not afraid to say, I am not in competition with you, 30-year-old woman who has this physique and looks like this. I want to see you win, because when I sit down, I want to see that next generation of women do and show up the exact same way, as strong as we are, because we don't want our legacies to go in vain. So my advice to anyone who deals with imposter syndrome is build yourself a tribe of not only lateral friendships, but women who are already in the space that can help you, right? And if you have to start as an intern, because we also live in a place where, or in a space and time where we're young and we are advancing far faster. We have access to everything to get us where we need to go. But there is no substitute for hard work. And there's no substitute for staying up in the long days and long nights. Before the picture comes on Instagram, before the election season comes, there is real work that has to happen. And when those women asked me to come, I came. I didn't care what the task was. If it was canvassing, I did it. If it was putting in a spreadsheet at 19 and 20 years old, I did those things just for the ability to sit in the room with them and watch them. If it was whatever it was I needed to do, because I knew that one day I wanted to be in leadership somewhere in some way. I did not know it was coming as early as it was, but having them there and having them there to this day is what empowers me. So when I'm feeling, I don't know if I should be here, because it is a thing. It's a thing for anyone, but especially for us as women, right? I don't know if I should be here. Is my dress too tight? Did I put on too much contour today? Did I say it right? Did I sound like I had an attitude? Is all of that? Watching those women show up as exactly who they were is what I channel when I feel that way. And so imposter syndrome is going to exist because we are human beings, and we have the added burdens of being minority in our race, in our gender and all that. That is going to be there. But what helps me get through it is channeling the energy of women that I was able to look at, whether it's on TV or in my real life. I didn't need to look on TV to see what was happening, because I had it right here. And I don't think it was by accident. I think God designed it that way, honestly.
Woo, so, okay. So I'm back. I'm not sure what happened. Oh, wow. That is like everything. And the thing that I love about this question is that Congresswoman can answer it, and it can be exactly the same thing that I would say. But what I would say is what helped me with my imposter syndrome, because it does exist, is the women in my life. And I am fortunate that there have always been Black women, starting with women in my family, my mother and my aunt, who were like, no, you go out there, you do this. I remember when I was 19 and pregnant, and I just knew, well, okay, if you're 19 and pregnant, then that's it. And my aunt Francine told me, no, it's not. You have that baby, you heal, and you get your butt back out there and you go back to college. And I did, and she's right. But if I go down the list, there's so many women. My high school English teacher, Cheryl Harvey, professors, Temple University, Nikki Frank, George Washington University, Dr. Mary Cottrell, Dr. Victoria Cargill, one of the first Black female epidemiologists in the city of Cleveland who went to the NIH, Dr. Leanna Clark, a Black sister at CHOP and University of Pennsylvania with dreadlocks down her back, taking names and kicking ass. We can go on and on and on of women. Miss Edith Hurd out of Williamsburg, Virginia. I remember when I was hired as the epidemiologist for the Ryan White Title I project in Norfolk, Virginia. I had a territory of 1.4 million people that I had to track. I was just coming out fresh with an epidemiology and health research degree from Temple University. I had worked at the University of Pennsylvania, and I just knew I knew it. And when I went down there and the first report was just sabotage, it was Miss Hurd, an older Black woman, that sat me down and said, shut up and listen. And this is what happened to you. And you can't let that happen to you again. And she was right. And I take that experience with me throughout my life. It was those experiences with those women that made me who I am. And there's no way that I couldn't sit here as a middle-aged Black woman and not give that to younger women, because guess what? You said it. I'm not in competition with some cute little 25-year-old girl. Come on, wear that dress, wear that weave, make sure your lace and your edges are done. I need you to be together, okay? Because the bottom line, when we talk about, that kind of intergenerational issue, it's really patriarchy that's driving those behaviors. And like I told many young women, any man that wants you, I don't think he's worth my time. So you're good, okay? So you're going about your business and do what you got to do. Make sure that you ain't got no lines showing in your dress, because you might be on TV and YouTube and you don't want people distracted. If you want to, push the girls up and look cute, girl, get them girls up. What did Cardi B say? Face dark, like, rack stacked up, shack height. Go for it. We need to stop making these hard, dichotomies of, beauty and smartness. I guarantee you, there are women out there who are being limited in what they can do because of how they show up. And I've dealt with that. And so as far as imposter syndrome, that was one of the things I dealt with a lot. When I was a teenager, I worked as a model. I was a print, and I was on catalog modeling. I'm not tall enough to do runway. I'm 5'6". That's it. So I did a lot of work in front of the camera. And when I, although I danced, I did ballet, but I also would go to the art museum and in the library and spend hours reading about Soviet history. And I played chess. And, I tried to learn different languages. And so it was kind of a difficult space for me to be in. So to go back to what Councilwoman said, yeah, I've been let into a lot of rooms by men, by cis hetero men in power, lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of rooms. And I spent more time staying on my feet, both literally and figuratively, in those spaces than I did to actually do the work. And it was those older Black women in those spaces who didn't see me as a threat that actually took me under their wing and said, you know what? Watch out for that guy. You're like the 5th intern he's had, and they all wind up pregnant somehow. Stay away from this guy. And it was those type of conversations that made me first feel protected, and then the imposter syndrome. Am I really as smart as they say I am? Yeah, I got this A in this class, but the professor also wanted to take me to dinner. I got this job, but now the executive director is like flirting with me every day. It's like, am I really this smart? And it really took those women to tell me, yes, you are. And I remember, I won't say which mentor told me this, and she was like, Tina, you have nothing that I want. So meaning sexually, you have nothing that I want. So if I'm telling you that you should be here, you should be here. And I think we need to hear that from people who don't have an invested interest in what we can give them. You know what I mean? Especially young women. And young women of all races, but in particularly minority young women, you walk into a cis white male dominated space, you are going to have to fight for your relevance. You're going to have to fight for your place at the table. And, that's where the imposter syndrome, I believe, kicks in. Not because I don't think I can do it, because I think that other people think I can't do it. And instead of doing the work, I'm too busy, defending myself and showing my relevance to be in the room. And it's just
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. I'm like super inspired. I feel like I have so many questions, but as we're getting closer to 11 o'clock, I guess I'm going to just ask a more specific question for Congresswoman Claybrooks. And that is like, how did you navigate serving in a state that you're not originally from? And how did you realize your experience from Detroit in New Jersey?
Oh, Lord. So first of all, you are speaking far beyond my pay grade. I am a councilwoman. But I appreciate that title, I appreciate it, but I am a councilwoman. So I want to make sure that, it's not, misconstrued. And I appreciate that a lot. But I will say that, that is a very interesting question. And I've moved around a lot. And in politics, we know that people, although you may be able to make it somewhere that you're not originally from, this is a field of stability and people being able to trust you and people being able to trust that you're going to be planted and do what's best for them and that they're not just a pass-through sort of thing. Again, I came to East Orange, New Jersey as a grad student. I was going to grad school in NYU and for urban planning, and I settled here. I had a good girlfriend of mine who I went to undergraduate with, shout out to Timey, who was living here. And upon my decision to stay here, what made me stay actually was the fact that I saw a lot of my home space here. It is a predominantly Black place in the same way that Detroit is. It does have similar issues, or I wouldn't call them issues, similar aspects about the city that I sought to really explore more in the same way that I would have at home. So to be honest with you, this was the first place I actually felt at home since I left Detroit. And I had been to Tallahassee, Florida. I had lived in Maryland. I had lived in DC. I had worked in Virginia. I was going to school in New York. And over a 10-year span, it was interesting because when I left home in 2009, I told God, okay, whatever's in it for me from here, you got it. Now, I left home kicking and screaming, right? Because it was what I was used to, I didn't care whether it was the abandoned buildings or, urban life and, all of the things that we sometimes assume that we know inherently are disproportionately devalued by our cities are also some of the things that end up being home for a lot of us. And so it took some unlearning and it took a leap of faith to leave home in the first place, not knowing. Being the first person to pursue school out of state in my family or pursue it really to the extent that I did at all. So when I got here, I ran into actually Mayor Green, who's now the mayor. He was a councilman at the time. And it was just after our last somewhat of a president was here. And I found myself very discouraged by everything and anything that was going on. So I said, you know what? Government can hold off for a while. I am going to go to school and mind my business because I'm from the Obama era. Stuff was happening. And how could this happen to our country, right? So I just was chilling for a while, going to school, challenging the status quo in my program at NYU and being in student government and being the president of the BSA and all those things. Then after meeting him at the train station, it was the first time I had seen anyone excited about doing this work. And I thought to myself at that train station that day, how could you be so excited? Do you know who's in the White House? Like, I know you're running for mayor and whatever, but how could you be so excited? But I needed to see someone else that looked like me, that was Black, that was still as excited and encouraged about doing this work for me to get involved. And he invited me. He was like, hey, you're a student. I remember I had like my head wrapped up, my Uggs or Tims, whichever one. I was not presentable. He could not have guessed that I had worked and done all these things based on the way I presented at that train station at 6:30 in the morning, 7 o'clock. But he invited me anyway because he said, "Oh, you're a grad student. We want more young people to be involved. Here's my card. Come to my office. Let's talk about this because we are looking for more young people to be invited not only into our community, but into our party and into the work that we're doing." And from that moment, it turned into me volunteering again. It turned into me becoming a district leader where in most spaces there's the whole ward or there's the whole district, and then there are smaller leaders that lead those neighborhoods. I think mine was about 10, maybe 10 blocks long, District 212. Shout out to y'all. And I was asked to do that. Hey, why don't you, you're showing yourself approved, you're canvassing, you're working in the office, you're, working on these campaigns, the senator campaigns, the governor's campaigns, and things like that. How about you consider leading your neighborhood as a district leader? And one invitation turned into another one. And while there was a small sense of the territorial, you're not from here, do you really want to be here? Is this just an opportunity for you? I had already planned on staying in East Orange anyway, because it was the first place that I had felt like home at that time since I left Detroit. And I didn't know what life would look like beyond grad school, but I knew that I would be here for just a little while. And I would be here for a little while longer. So when I was invited into the community so openly, I did have to face the idea of, you're not from here. When you go to a door, somebody's asking me that question because we're East Orange. We protect East Orange. We are homegrown. What are you going to do that is going to make our place better? And what I would tell them is this: what East Orange goes through is not any different. It may have its small nuances, but Black cities across the United States experience similar issues. And I may not have been born and raised in East Orange, but there are some kids in foster care in East Orange. There are some students struggling. There is a push to dislocate people in some places. There are systemic issues that exist here that I've experienced as a person that lives in a building. I've seen some things, I've done some things, and there are the very same things that need to be advocated for in other places are the same things that need to be advocated for here. And one of the things I also noticed is that because I was born and raised in Detroit and Inkster, Michigan, there are some things that I inherently know shouldn't be that I had grown comfortable with. So in my city, there's abandoned properties everywhere. There's murders. People are struggling. And because that's what I knew, that's what I had become comfortable with. So I don't know if I could have been the same effective person in changing that before I could unlearn that those things were not normal and that people shouldn't live that way because I was so used to it. And so God sent me other places. And here, my goal is I don't care where I end up or where I am, the goal is always to make that place better than it was when I found it. So I don't know I didn't know what God had in store for me at the time, but everything that was set out for me, or the invitation to serve and the things that I needed to do to make my ward where I lived and I took so much pride in better, far superseded the fear of, what are people going to think about me because I'm not from here? Because in actuality, if you talk to everyday people, my everyday experience and my growing up and my upbringing, it's the same as people in Newark and people in East Orange and Detroit, Philadelphia, Richmond, Virginia, Miami Gardens, Opelika, parts of Atlanta, all of those places experience those same things. And so that is some of the things that I faced, but I also had the strength of saying, no, this is where God has me, and this is where people have asked me to serve. So I'm going to do that and do my best at it,
That's amazing. Thank you so much for
No,
sharing.
thank you for asking. Thank you.
That was awesome. Thank you, Councilwoman Claybrooks. Before I go to you, Kenyatta, I wanted to tell the audience that you guys can leave questions for us to do like a more open Q&A, because we would love to hear from you guys. And with that being said, I have realized that a lot of women who lead their communities and lead these political spaces often are led by a why or like a mission. So I wanted to ask you, Kenyatta, how your why, how your mission relates to both of the roles that you encompass, and how, and it's like a twofold question, sorry. And then what groundwork did you lay in order to make your movement successful and make those roles that you occupy successful?
Oh wow. I think I often get that question. Why this? There's so many things going on. Why did you choose to do this? Well, why not? I think that often for me is an insulting question. It's like, no one asks, green space advocates, why are you interested in environmental justice? No one asks animal rights activists, well, why are you interested in, increasing spay neuter so we can, reduce the amount of healthy animals euthanized in our. No one asks that question. And I find that that question only comes up when we're talking about Black girls. So what I'm going to say for your audience and for anyone that's listening is stop asking that damn question. The reason why I'm in this work is because over 60% of Black girls in the United States are survivors of sexual violence before her 18th birthday. 60%. In any other space, that would be considered an epidemic. But we don't want to talk about it. Black women have the highest homicide rate of any other races. And most of the homicides that occur by intimate partners. So we have real issues here that we need to talk about. Now, as far as my particular work in human trafficking, I know you guys asked me about that, so I'll kind of talk about that. So human trafficking, first of all, as a society, we just need a whole education on what human trafficking is. Human trafficking encompasses sex trafficking, it encompasses labor trafficking, and to a smaller degree, organ trafficking. And what I will tell you is that when we talk about human trafficking in the United States, we talk about domestic minor sex trafficking because it's a major issue, but it's only the tip of the iceberg of what trafficking looks like. The other thing too, when we talk about human trafficking, we also have to talk about how we have politically handled human trafficking. So let's go back to the 90s. So international human trafficking in the United States usually involves both sex trafficking and labor trafficking. In the 90s, in the early 90s, late 80s, when the fall of the Soviet Union happened and Yugoslavia disbanded, we started seeing a new industry of mail order brides, au pairs, and the like. And most of these young women came from former Soviet countries, and they were, as a friend of mine said, they're spicy white people, they're spicy white girls. So they were of interest to Western men. So when we started seeing sex trafficking in the 90s, it was girls from Ukraine, from Czech Republic, Slovenia, Slovakia, Belarus, Romania, and Hungary. And when we started seeing that, the ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, they actually treated those women like victims. Many of those victims got asylum in the United States. Some went back to their home country because that's where they wanted to be. But when it was, discovered that these women were being trafficked against their will, Interpol got involved. Interpol is the international police that kind of governs Europe. Interpol got involved. The United States immigrations got involved. When these girls were determined to have been trafficked internationally, they were given asylum. So let's fast forward to 2020. International trafficking victims are, for the most part, brown and Black. They're coming from Central America and South America because they're landlocked. And what happens with these trafficking victims? They're detained. They're more likely to be detained under the pretense of not being an American citizen and being here illegally. Person can't be illegal, by the way. Then they are given asylum. And there's a few visa programs that they call, for asylee type stuff, but basically they're asking these young people to testify against traffickers, for the most part, who are American citizens and have American banks to defend themselves. We've never asked trafficking victims to do that. We have never asked any trafficking victim from the Ukraine or the Czech Republic or Slovenia to testify against their American trafficker, but we're doing it now. So number two about trafficking, let's talk about labor trafficking for a second. Every time you see these construction properties going up, there is an entire chain that happens with that. A lot of union workers, union carpenters, and electricians and plumbers are not used to build these large properties because they're union and they expect union wages. So what happens? You have a whole bunch of guys rolling up in a pickup truck from Guatemala and Honduras that are doing these trades and they're being trafficked. Nobody talks about that. So when we talk about human trafficking, we got to also talk about the fact that sometimes we participate in human trafficking without even realizing it. For men, how many men have gone to a bachelor party and saw what were clearly very young women, and instead of standing up and saying, hey, how old are these girls, or why are these girls here, just enjoyed the show? How many times have you hired a landscaper and didn't ask their citizenship, not their citizenship, but if they were here on their own regard? I'll give you a quick story. So there is a handyman that works for the property manager of where I live, and he speaks Spanish. And so one time he came in, and we were just kind of having a little conversation in Spanish. And then I had the opportunity to ask him, so how long have you been here, and how's it going for you? Just simple questions to determine that this man was actually here on his own recognizance. And that's what we have to start doing. But it's easier to just pay somebody $50 to landscape our property and not give a damn where they're from. So human trafficking is happening in front of us. The other thing too, I want to call some school boards out. Right now in the state of Georgia, we have a human trafficking problem that is astronomical. And every year in our General Assembly, the governor and his wife decide they want to do something about human trafficking, which is nothing. And so the question I ask is, how many school districts in the state of Georgia currently have legislation to address trafficking in their schools? One. And I want to bring into the space Atlanta school board member Erica Mitchell, who actually had to fight to get a comprehensive anti-sex trafficking policy at the school district level, and is now traveling the country to speak to other school districts about the importance of actually putting that into school policy. Because here's what happens. When the girls are being trafficked, they're truant. Sometimes they're missing weeks and weeks and weeks at a time. They try to come back to school, they're denied. Nobody is having these conversations. So the other thing about trafficking that we need to talk about is that the complexion and the color of trafficking victims of the United States look like us. However, the people who want to center the conversation do not. You know, as my daughter says, you know, they're colonizing human trafficking also. So we have to, as Black women advocates, political activists, lawmakers, we have to be able to say, why is it that the face of trafficking victims is Black and brown, yet the decision makings are not Black and brown? When I've gone to so many conferences on human trafficking where I've watched Black women, Latino women actually fighting for the opportunity to just speak, and it's just dismissed. And we have to really address that. At one point, the Polaris Project. Yes, I'm going to put people on blast. I don't care. So the Polaris Project is the national. They actually manage the national human trafficking hotline. And what they would do at some point is that was the clearinghouse for data on human trafficking, to include labor trafficking and sex trafficking. And what they didn't collect was race data. They did collect citizenship data, but they didn't collect race data for years until several people, myself included, called them out on it. And the idea was, well, it's not, why does it matter? Because it's all that. No, it's not. It matters because domestic minor sex trafficking in the United States is a Black girl issue. It is it is about young Black women, usually disenfranchised women and brown women between the ages of 11 and 16. That is a domestic minor sex trafficking victim. That is the landscape of domestic minor sex trafficking. But when you look at the policies, we still have juvenile prostitution hold in our state legislation. How in the hell can you say you are about eradicating domestic minor sex trafficking and you're still adjudicating delinquent juveniles for prostitution?
Yes.
So to answer the second part of your question, how do you keep it going? You have to. Because if you don't, there's too many people who will let it die, or will change the narrative, or will censor the narrative. And before you know it, you're not talking about the fact that girls are being recruited from schools, and now you're talking about white vans driving around the neighborhood. So you really have to be almost boorish about it and say, no, 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 that's not what happens. I've been on several human trafficking, anti-human trafficking panels that I've walked off the panel. This was before Zoom, child, so I got up and walked away and walked to my car, and people were still trying to call me because I refused to be associated with foolishness. And I think part of the reality of this work is that you have to be able to say yes, and you have to be able to get the hell up, because too many people are complacent with the status quo because it puts your name in lights. You get a couple of clicks on Instagram. You might get a couple of dollars in an honorarium. The one particular human trafficking panel, I sent the honorarium back because I didn't even want it. Because they were talking the same foolishness of all girls at risk, all girls are not at risk. They didn't want to talk about race data. They didn't want to talk about social economics. They didn't want to talk about any of that. They want to talk about all girls are at risk, and we need to pray, and we need to put everybody in jail, and yay, and donate to our agency. No. We also need more nonprofit agencies devoted to human trafficking that are led by Black and immigrant leaders.
Yes.
Preferably Black women.
Yes. Yes.
So, did I answer the question? Do I need? Is there anything else? Show me my glasses on. Look at my glasses on.
No, really. I just want to just add to the one point about complacency and status quo. One thing I would share with women is that in this business is that be willing to walk away if it does not or no longer serve your purpose. You have to be bigger than the position. And I think that right now, advocacy, I like to call advocacy and public service the new cash cow. And it's, I don't want it to be confused, right? You have to have a heart for this. And if you find that whatever space you are in, the name on the program, the seat that they save for you at the front of the banquet hall when COVID is over, the Zooms that you get invited on, none of that, all of that has to be disposable to you if you don't feel like your purpose is being met. So I may be the face on the flyer today. It could be somebody else on the face of the flyer tomorrow. So that ego that develops in a lot of people around leadership has to take a backseat. It has to take a backseat. And I appreciate you, Kenyatta, for saying that, because you have to be willing to walk away. It can't be so taxing to you as an individual. You cannot allow it to tax you that much. You have to be willing to say no. And you have to be willing to give up the seat. If it means your integrity, if it means the cause that you're fighting for, if it means that the people you work with don't want to advance what it is that they're not on the same page as you. And you need to be able to call out those things respectfully sometimes and just downright, raw other times. But I will say to you, be very wise in choosing what space you will occupy, because we don't all occupy the same space. Not everybody will occupy elected space. Not everybody will be on the national headlines. But whatever it is, the ego part of it has to go, because this is real work that is going to attack everything about your entire being. It is going to tax you. And at night when I go to sleep and I couldn't make whatever the popular thing folks are doing in my age are doing, those are the things that are taxing sometimes. But I have to decide that this work is worth it. The moment it is not, trust and believe. If I'm on a Zoom, it won't be in this capacity. Trust me. I will offer that, because we also have to have, again, dedication, but discernment and real commitment on top of it. And everything else will come. That stuff will come. And sometimes it's not always good to accept every invitation, and that's something that I've had to learn. And Kenyatta, thank you for sharing that and empowering us with that, because that's a part of it too that people don't like to talk about. Status quo is real. It is a very real thing.
I want to add one thing.
Yeah.
Go ahead, sweetheart. I want to
No,
add
go
one
ahead, I'm
thing.
done. That's all
Okay.
I wanted to add, because it was so powerful. It touched me, and it reminded me of how many times, that part of it is left out of the conversation, for sure.
Yeah, and I know, and with this platform, I know one at a time is how we got to speak, or it just sounds like fried chicken. Okay, so I want to go back to a couple of things that you said, and that's the thing of walking away. Not everyone has the ability, and I know that. And
Mm-hmm.
not everyone, especially in this space of human trafficking, has the space to be as raw. And one of the things that I've done is that there are quite a few agencies in Georgia that I love. I'm going to shout them out right now. The Star Institute, Tabitha's House, Dr. Charnel Miles, who is
Mm-hmm.
actually doing trauma-based therapy on
Mm-hmm.
trafficking survivors. We have people that are, and I'm not going to say their names, but they actually are doing ground to ground, on the ground work, rescuing girls. I did a ride around a few years ago with someone. It's like, when we talk about trafficking, here's what trafficking prevention looks like. Imagine getting a text at 12 o'clock midnight from someone that's 14 years old from Wichita, Kansas, and somehow got on a bus to Magic City, and now she's run away from her parents. And you got to get out of your car, and you got to go find her on the street, because you can't stand in one place. You'll find her before her pimp finds her. Imagine having to actually fight with pimps to get girls in your car. That's the conversation we're not talking about. There are people out there every day putting their lives on the line, walking around with concealed carry permits and bulletproof vests just to rescue trafficked girls.
Mm-hmm.
So when people want to put me on a panel and talk about, sunshine and lollipops, and I just
Mm-hmm.
tune them out. And I tune them out because I have the privilege of having a space where I can be the mouthpiece for these people, a
Mm-hmm.
mouthpiece to the legislature when I look at legislation that says, okay, we're going to not allow some victims of human trafficking to be adjudicated delinquent for prosecution if they help prosecute. Kiss my ass. And I'm going to tell you this, and I apologize. But I say this because that's what I said in the actual meeting when that bill came up, and it died, thank God. Because to tell a 16-year-old the only way you will not be adjudicated delinquent and potentially go to a juvenile detention center is if you rat on your pants, and then we'll take it off. My question is, why is juvenile prostitution a codified crime anyway?
Mm-hmm.
So that is some work that I'm actually going to be doing nationwide, is working with some lawmakers and advocates to write policy to get that redacted from juvenile codes around the country, starting with Alaska to Zamunda. I guess that's the state now. But we have to be serious about this, because if we're talking about we want to eradicate human trafficking, we got to start by saying we do not believe that juveniles can be solicited for sex legally. We do not believe that a juvenile can be a prostitute. And that's a very controversial conversation. You want to get some of these trafficking? Yeah, tell them, ask them that. Why are we still adjudicating delinquent adolescents in the state of Georgia? Huh? Girl, you don't know that? But you the head of the human beloved. So in my space, I think I've eventually become a cantankerous auntie, and that's okay. If we want to talk about kind of, age and, spaces, I've become the cantankerous auntie that really can't be shut up. I've been asked to leave meetings. I have been escorted out by law enforcement because I won't stop. And I think we need people in those spaces, because this issue is a real issue. And there are people who are beholden to their agency. They're doing the best they can. They're doing this work undercover so that they're not clocked. So yeah, I say what they.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Ooh, this is killing my eyes.
Thank you both so, so much. I know I feel so educated and ready to keep the fight going and have these important conversations with people in our community. So I just want to thank you again so much for being here and sharing your time and your expertise and your experience with us. It means a lot. to me and Ignite. And if Zion, if you want to share a few words before we.
Yes, thank you guys so much. I've honestly never been so inspired by anybody else than to speaking to you guys today. So I'm definitely going to take into consideration what you guys have said and just continue to use that to excel myself and people around me. So thank you so much for taking the time to be a part of this conversation today.
Absolutely. It's an honor to be here. And if I can just share a couple of my socials or ways that I could be contacted, because these conversations have to continue. There is everyday, day-to-day work that happens. There are memos that have to be written that people have to learn how to write. There's all these things that there's language in legislation that you have to learn how to use. There's in my field of urban planning, there aren't many Black women like this. Like it's very hard to find us, and so for women who want to learn how to use systems like GIS and start to look at city maps so that they can start seeing where the disparities are via Google Earth and things like that. I would definitely dedicate myself or some time to answering those emails and those calls because it's equally as important as some of the overarching things we discussed today. So I'm going to share my Instagram, which is Brittany Claybrooks _, very simple. Twitter, Claybrooks _, Facebook, Brittany D. Claybrooks. And my email address, I'm not sure if it's gonna be, shared widely if I put it in the chat. So it's just brittany.claybrookes@eastorange-nj.gov. So feel free to reach out because the women that poured into me, I had more access to them than Zoom. I had more access to them than one time that I saw them looking really pretty on the house floor. They poured into me every single day, all the time. They got on flights if they needed to. And so I'm dedicated to being, to this extent that I have the capacity, the very same type of support that I needed.
And I guess for me, my socials, you can find me on Twitter _Legis Empress, LEGIS Empress. I'm on Facebook. So here's the thing about my Facebook. At one point, people were making fake accounts. So I do have a verified account on Facebook, Kenyette Barnes. If you go anywhere else, that's not me, girl. And I don't know what you're going to get yourself into. I'm on Instagram, just Kenyette _Tish. And I'm gonna open up my my mentoring, my yearly mentoring again sometime in July. I do tend to look for young women between 19 and 35 who will be interested in, mentoring around legislative strategy, lobbying, and also lawmaking. So when I open that up, definitely I'll share with you all so that if you know young ladies who will be interested, they can submit the application. We can have the interview, and it's really straightforward. I mean, you interview with me, so it's not a whole process. Like you got to jump through hoops. And no. If you're interested, you call me. I see you, and we decide together if this is going to work for you. So it's been my honor, my pleasure. I am overwhelmed with gratitude just to be a part of this platform. And definitely, Councilwoman, let's connect at some point because I would love to have a conversation with you about what we're doing here with the Atlanta School Board and maybe something that you guys can help us with in Jersey.
Same. Thank you so much. I am. I'll reach out. Don't worry about it. Thank you.
So I just want to chime in. This was so freaking powerful. I'm monitoring the chats and everything. I actually have goosebumps. You ladies were dynamic. And I thank you so much. And I appreciate you all keeping it real because that's what this is about. So no more status quo. I love it. I love it. I love it. So again, this was perfect just in time for Women's History Month because of course we have superpowers. So you young ladies are charged with making sure that you reach out to both Miss Kenyetta and then also to Councilwoman Claybrooks, because again, they will continue to inspire. This is fiery, fierce leadership, honey. You got it raw and you got it good. So
thank you.
I couldn't think of any other women to actually do this.
That's really sweet. Thank you.
Awesome.
That's
so
awesome.
use your network. Use your network, ladies.
Right.
And we'll be back again. But thank you so much. And I hope y'all enjoy your Saturday.
And I know there was some questions. So if people have direct questions, if we don't have time now, I guess people can. I don't know. I'm really sensitive about questions. I think that part of this process is a feedback, a loop, and so that's a Kenyette issue. If people have questions, if we can't do it on the actual platform, please find a way to reach out so that we can at least have your questions answered.
Joy, are there any questions in the YouTube? Okay. I know I checked in there. I didn't see any. It was just great comments about how wonderful this is. But definitely, if there are any questions that come through, we will make sure that we reach out to you all, the guest speakers, to make sure that they are answered and given out again. I would love to see a part 2 to this, an expansion, but this was phenomenal, and I love it. So you ladies go out and do the work. Continue to do the great work that you are doing, using your voice and amplifying it. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Lauren, Zion, anything?
Let's not forget that you are a councilwoman.
Thank you, Asha. Thank you so much,
Thank you for having us.
You're welcome.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome.
Let's not forget how fabulous you are. Okay.
Yeah,
Please.
look, every